Hello, everybody. Glad to see you. My name is Uta Meier-Hahn. I'm a doctoral researcher at the Humboldt Institute for Internet and Society here in Berlin, and I'm also a former academic editor of the Internet Policy Review, which is the journal on online regulation and the organizer of this session. Last year, when we had the idea for this panel, we thought there was a story to be told. A story about how the Turkish government had increasingly tightened up the grip on the online public sphere during the last decade, and about how this was a tension with democratic principles such as freedom of information and freedom of expression. With the coup d'etat attempt last July, and with what followed, communication control has been exacerbated in Turkey. So this session became more topical than all of us would have liked. So we will proceed the following way. First, we will try to put internet control in some historical context that is important to know and understand the current situation. We will then explain and discuss the legal foundation for banning content and so on in Turkey. From there, we will turn to what censorship and governmental attempts to control online communication look like in practice. So what does it feel to be online in Turkey? And finally, we will explore the strategies of resistance. At the end, we will have 15 minutes reserved for Q&A, as we imagine that many of you may have questions. So I will let you know, and you can prepare your questions and come to the microphones then. But before we start, let me please introduce our panelists. To the far right is Efe Kerem Sözeri. Mr. Sözeri is a tech journalist and a PhD candidate at the Vrije Universiteit Amsterdam. He writes, and occasionally he also sings about press freedom, internet censorships, and internet censorship for outlets such as the Daily Dot, Vocativ, Global Voices, as well as German Taz. Most recently, Mr. Sözeri has co-authored an academic report in which he analyzes Turkey's internet policy after the coup attempt. And one of the many interesting findings of this report is that the Turkish government is increasingly engaging in informal and less traceable modes of communication control. He will tell us more about this later on. To his left is Professor Başak Çalı. Professor Çalı teaches international law at the Hertie School of Governance here in Berlin, and she's also director of the Center for Global Public Law at Koç University in Istanbul. Among the many positions that she has held, she served as a Council of Europe expert on the European Convention on Human Rights since 2002. In several of her publications, she deals with media freedom. Professor Çalı has called for the European Court of Human Rights to become more active in the sense that when the court rules in the spirit of media freedom, that these rulings actually lead to more protection for journalists on the ground. Next to me is Dr. Melih Kırlıdoğ. He was a long-time faculty member in the computer engineering department of Marmara Üniversitesi in Istanbul. In his 2015 much downloaded and well-received article on the Internet Policy Review, he retraced the road to extensive internet censorship in Turkey. Dr. Kırlıdoğ points out that the Turkish public is less aligned with the government than it might appear from the outside. He himself signed the Academics for Peace petition, which led to the dismissal of close to 400 signatories from the university positions as of today, and including himself. So please give a round of applause to our three panelists before we start the panel. Melih, let's start off with some recent news. Many have heard that the Wikipedia has been blocked in Turkey for users in Turkey since the end of April. What do we know about this situation?
Yes, Wikipedia has been blocked since a few days in Turkey. Apparently, the government wants some material to be removed from Wikipedia, but Wikipedia declines it, and they want Wikipedia to open an office in Turkey. They do not want that either. The government has the means to block those unwanted materials, but they chose to block the entire domain. So it's something like closing down the entire library instead of removing for a few books. They chose to do that way.
We've heard that this block is legally based on something that is called the Internet Law in Turkey, the law number 5651. What does this law regulate? Give us some historical context. And how did Turkey arrive at this?
5651, law number 5651 was introduced in 2007. That was 5 years AKP rose to power. During that time, AKP was pro-democracy, vehemently pro-democracy, and enjoyed the full support of the Western world. So it was some sort of honeymoon between the almost the entire world and the AKP, and everybody was surprised with that law because essentially it's a censorship law. So we now understand that 5651 is very important as an early signal what the AKP will be like in the next decade. So its importance is beyond that censorship issue. AKP, what did the law bring? It took some catalog crimes from the Turkish penal code, such as child abuse, prostitution, incitement to suicide, and so on, such things. But the child abuse was very important because it was used as an excuse to introduce the law. Prior to the law, just a few months before the introduction of the law, Turkish press was flooded by the child abuse stories on the net. That was something unusual because child abuse is a problem in Turkey, just like all over the world, maybe not more than average, but it's not a very big problem on the net. So now we understand that it has been used as an excuse to introduce the law. It was effective because the MPs, the opposition MPs, did not want to get involved in such a critical issue. 5651 brought some organizational differences. There was an organization, public organization named TIB, Telekomünikasyon İletişim Başkanlığı, that is Presidency of Telecommunications, something like that. And it was, the main task of it was to tap the telephones by the court order. By the 5651, it became very powerful and it became the main mechanism for censorship and surveillance in the web. That time was the honeymoon cooperation between the Gülen movement and the AKP, and the TIB was filled with the Gülenists. We had some amendments to 5651, and with each amendment, the law became more and more draconian. In December 2013, there was a major corruption scandal implying Erdogan, his family, and his cabinet ministers, and 4 of the cabinet ministers had to resign as a result of that scandal. The news was disseminated through the internet, and just after the scandal, a few weeks after that, the first amendment to 5651 came. It brought the fast blocking of the websites in 4 hours, with or without the court order. Another amendment came in September 2014, just 1 month after Erdogan rose to presidency in 1 month before. And another one came, just after the September amendments, the Constitutional Court overturned the amendments, some key amendments, some very important amendments. But AKP waited for some time. Some key elements of the Constitutional Court, the judges retired, and then they brought the same amendments with different wording again.
Thank you. Maybe we can pick up on that, Başak, as a lawyer. You found this to be an interesting twist as well, what happened with the amendments. What's your assessment as a lawyer of how this changes the legal process?
I mean, as Melih was just talking about this is a very new law. It's 2007, and the story of censorship is really from 2007 until now, that this is the process that we're discovering with this law. The way that the law has been amended, and it has been amended so many times, there are some very significant changes in 2014, 2015, and now with the state of emergency decrees, because Turkey is currently under a state of emergency that has been extended for another 3 months recently. What we've seen is that the logic of the law is censorship first, freedom of expression perhaps second. This is the way that the law operates is actually sort of instigates first blocking of internet sites very quickly in a very speedy way. There are quite a lot of powers that are vested in some of the governmental institutions to block things within 4 hours. Judges can block things within 24 hours. And then after all of this blocking takes place, the idea is that the individuals, the users, will have to fight it back. So the logic of the law has reversed the way we tend to think about freedom of expression, where we will think that the expression is the principle and the exception under very sort of limited circumstances would be some sort of a limitation. The Turkish story is upside down, and so the law prioritizes censorship at the expense of expression.
So this has not been left uncriticized. In the last couple of years, the European Court of Human Rights ruled against this law a couple of times. Maybe you can tell us briefly about the character that these cases had and about what the court objected to.
So yeah, I mean, there are a lot of players, judicial players, when we talk about internet censorship. A very important judicial player has been the European Court of Human Rights, the one that sits in Strasbourg, the one that Germany is also a member of, as I'm sure you all know. And another very important player has been the Turkish Constitutional Court. There have been 4 very important cases, very sort of principle-building cases, both from the European Court of Human Rights and from the Strasbourg Court. And these have happened in 2012, 2014, 2015. And a key message from the European Court of Human Rights to the Turkish government and the Turkish parliament was about the quality of this law, that the law itself was not foreseeable. People who were able to express, receive or impart information on the internet had no idea when they will be censored, under what kind of circumstances. And a huge issue, which I think this is how you started the conversation, has been the practice of complete banning of platforms. You may have heard the banning of YouTube, Twitter. So Wiki is another of these things. And the European Court of Human Rights will say, well, you cannot block a whole platform. You cannot block a whole place where people are receiving and imparting information. This is not the kind of, the law in itself has to find a way out of this. The good news was also maybe in 2014, the Turkish Constitutional Court has also picked up this problem of a very disproportionate way of limiting expression on the internet. So we have had some, if you will, some good judgments, but from very, very high courts at the very top of the hierarchy in Turkey and in Strasbourg, saying that there are some very serious problems, both with this law and the way that it's applied in the Turkish context.
And so, what were the consequences of this ruling? That is, I mean, it's a very strong sign, a very strong signal also from the Turkish constitutional courts against this law and how it's been applied.
There have not been any positive consequences as far as we can tell as of today, but I stand to be corrected. Maybe things will improve just after this conversation, right? We could hope for that. So the consequences have not really come out. So the European Court of Human Rights is saying, well, you have to take a very good look at this law. The way that you've been amending the law is limiting the expression further and further and further, where the Strasbourg Court was saying you have to do exactly the opposite of what you've been doing since 2007. This hasn't been met with a more freedom of expression friendly law. On the contrary, we have seen retrogressive measures. The law has become worse after this judgment, in particular the one that was delivered in 2012. The Turkish Constitutional Court in 2014 signaled to the domestic judges, the first judges that actually do these blockings within 24 hours, that's a very limited amount of time that they have power to do so, the court was trying to signal to them that you have to make you're making disproportionate, unreasoned decisions, you have to balance expression and other urgent needs like privacy or national security. But again, when we look at how the courts have been reacting to the Constitutional Court, we're not able to see any success stories or any sort of a positive interaction between what the top courts are saying and what the lower courts are doing on the ground.
It sounds a little bit like this is a teethless tiger at the moment, for now at least, though we still keep hoping. Efe Kerem, let's talk about how this plays out in practice. So, what is internet control like? A recent report that you've co-authored speaks about how the Turkish government has tightened the noose, and that has been mentioned here before. How is all this taking shape?
Well, it's pretty much following this legal history, actually, and all these legal history and the methods of blocking is following the government's needs to censor content. So when this law was introduced in 2007, a year after, the government started to block content by the DNS blacklists. And these DNS blacklists were synced. Mm-hmm. Can you
maybe you explain a little bit what DNS blacklists are.
Sure. Domain name servers are like phone books of internet. So when you are writing something on your browser's address book, then it takes you to Google, it takes you to Twitter. It needs to ask certain points in the internet. Where is Twitter, basically? It's like asking for an address. So these DNS requests, domain name server requests, are sent out like that. So Turkish government basically put like a police control at the corners, so that whenever someone is asking for Twitter, the police says, no, the road is blocked, so you cannot access to Twitter. So this is what they do. To overcome this, people changed their DNS servers. So they were using other DNS servers so that they can take another route to reach Twitter, basically. But then they introduced, with the more need to censor content, they started to introduce IP-level blocks. So they were blocking a part of WordPress altogether when they were blocking one blog post or something. And then by 2014, with all these amendments that came after the corruption, they need more granular control of the internet, so they forced ISPs, internet service providers, to install DPI, deep packet inspection tools in their network, so that
what is DPI?
Okay, deep packet inspection is like this. So you are again, you are trying to reach Twitter, right? Or you are trying to reach Wikipedia. This time, it is so much detail that the ISP, the internet service provider, also the government, wants to control not only whether you will reach Wikipedia, but also which articles on Wikipedia you are trying to read. That's also one of the great ways, the great concerns, if you look from both sides, concerns for privacy. This is, if, for example, you try to put the tabs on all the national news outlets, internet news outlets out there, then you can make a profile of everyone who is reading which sources, who is reading which articles, and etc. So this came after the corruption, because this is when the government needed to blanket censor all the content about corruption investigation, basically. So they started to issue cancellation orders, like banning orders, by URL addresses, like news from this website, another two more news from this website. So this is more intrusive, more granular control over this. And this went up towards the post-coup, right? And in the post-coup part, this is, at one level we block Twitter. But then the reasons of blocking Twitter also gets lightened. So when it all started, it was like bombing explosions, terror attacks. So these were the reasons that government was issuing gag orders, and they were also, blocking Twitter altogether. But then there were email leaks, like the son-in-law of Erdogan, the country's energy minister, Berat Albayrak's emails were leaked by the Red Hat hacker group. So this was one of the reasons to block all the cloud services, Google Drive, Outlook, everything, all together, even GitHub. They even blocked GitHub for that reason. So the control increases, and the reasons to block content decreases. So this is kind of tightening the nose. And perhaps how this really, like literally tightening, is controlling the traffic. So instead of blocking Twitter right now, government is throttling traffic. So that means, like, again, let's go with the same, like you are all of you going to Twitter, but then government puts a control at one corner and says that there is only one line to Twitter. So not all of you cannot go. So you all wait there. There's a huge traffic to go to Twitter, and it takes about 20 minutes for you to see the Twitter page. Your timeline, right? So this is how. So instead of blocking Twitter, and then we have the hashtags of Turkey block Twitter again, that sort of thing. So instead of that, they are throttling it. So this is how the control is increasing.
Okay, but as we know, the internet is usually being provided by internet service providers, who are very often, and most of the time, private entities, private companies. And the internet works in a decentralized way. So how can the government throttle the traffic of everybody in Turkey? How is this even feasible?
Unfortunately, it goes pretty much like the media ownership procedure. There are certain licenses that these internet service providers have to have from the Turkish government. So if you are not playing with the game with the government, I mean, if you are not implementing the censorship orders, basically, your license to operate in Turkey can be cancelled. And there are, of course, all the business relationships, the former publicly owned company, the Türk Telekom, the main state service provider, was privatized, and it was privatized to a group that is close to Erdogan. So these sorts of business relationships also, build these kind of connections, so that the ISPs are even willing to do that, because they want to operate in Turkey and make profits. Basically, they are companies. They are not there to fight for our rights.
Mm. So you've been talking about the blocking of content specifically. You've been talking about throttling.
Yeah.
We've also heard stories about total blackouts. Is there any truth in this? And how? I mean, a general question from the outside also always is, how do we know about these measures? How do we understand that these measures are taking place? How do you, as a tech journalist, make sure that what you're reporting is actually right?
There's a great monitoring group in Turkey. It's called Turkey Blocks. And if you're interested about Turkey, please follow their work. They put some probes, like a small computers on every network, basically on every ISP, all around Turkey. So what these small computers do they are like sending requests to Twitter. So everywhere. So in the end, they have the data of whether Twitter is accessible from Turkey, Twitter is accessible from this corner of Turkey, whether internet is accessible from this corner of Turkey. And what you refer are the regional blackouts. So they shut down internet on certain region of Turkey. It's related to the Kurdish conflict. So they were replacing the local elected officials over there, elected mayors. and they were supposed to be, they were expecting protests, and to prevent protests, this is also a way, you know, the intrusion, the interference with the connection increases with the reasons becoming, you know, smaller and lighter and lighter.
Okay. Başak, maybe just briefly, you've already alluded to that earlier, these different types of measures. What do they look like from a legal perspective? Is it all the same whether I block a specific piece of content or if I block a whole platform? What does this look like from your perspective? And then also following to that, to the people who are affected by the banning of content, there should be an appeal process. Maybe you can also talk about that a little bit. But first, what can you sort the situation legally? Is it all the same?
So I guess by this time you've learned the name of the law or the number of the law. It's the 5651. So there are a lot of answers to your questions are in this law. There are lots of ways of blocking both the URLs and also the domain names. There are possibilities provided for this under different issues. So Melih started with the sort of the pornography and that sort of look more sort of general concerns, but there are also specific provisions where you can block websites or content on websites on grounds of national security, prevention of crime, national order, and then there's a separate body where you could block these things based on privacy concerns. So there are lots of exceptions as to how you would be blocking things, and there could be multiple routes to this. For national security, for example, the government could initiate the process. The Prime Minister's office or any of the ministries could say, we have a concern with this particular site, we'd like this to be blocked, and then that has to be followed through within 4 hours of an interim measure, that it will be quickly done, and then this will come before a judge. And the judge has to decide sort of within 24 to 48 hours on these things. So these things can very, very quickly happen. In terms of slowing down the internet or some of the other measures, there's a huge debate within the Turkish legal community about whether these have actually any legal basis. So this law doesn't allow for these things to happen. The law is about blocking websites or blocking sort of URLs, but not sort of the slowing down on the internet. So just to be clear, there's no Turkish law that says you can slow down the internet. It's not written down anywhere. So in terms of the appeal process, when someone's website or URL is blocked or their website is blocked, what could they do? The law operates on the principle that it will first get blocked, so you have to fight that back. So you cannot sort of have a time to have a discussion about whether it should or it shouldn't be. You have to appeal to a judge, and these judges are sort of single formation judges. So they're not sort of a judicial appeal, but a single judge.
Explain that a little bit more. Single formation judges.
Single formation judge, right? So this is called criminal peace justices. This is a particular judicial arrangement that was brought in just a couple of years back. This is a very special judicial formation that only deals with this type of decisions, for example, of blocking or unblocking of the internet. So this is just composed of one person, so not a panel, a single judge will make this decision. And if they make the decision, you can appeal to the next judge. So you don't appeal up hierarchically, but you, so if your internet was blocked, your URL was blocked by judge number 1, you can appeal to judge number 2. And they're at the same hierarchy, which has been an issue that has also been debated. So if judge number 2 agrees with judge number 1, that's it. You have actually exhausted your remedies. Then you can go to the Turkish Constitutional Court on grounds of freedom of expression, freedom to receive or impart information. And of course, from one judge to the other is a very quick journey. So this will, you could be rejected within a few days from both of these two judges, but your journey to the Turkish Constitutional Court will be months, if not years.
So
that's going to be a very long process to get your constitutional rights back after quickly you will be rejected from judge number 1 and 2.
Just to come back to where we started about the Wikipedia, at what stage is the Wikipedia case right now?
So let me say just two quick more things. So there are two types of legal activism that has been born in relation to this type of censorship in Turkey, which is also quite remarkable. One is if you're the victim. So if your own site was blocked, obviously you will want to do this. But a lot of individuals will not want to do that. It's quite expensive. You need a lot of lawyers to go to the Turkish Constitutional Court. It's very difficult. But what we've seen is also a user activism. So in relation to Twitter and YouTube, it's not the Twitter or YouTube, for example, but people who are actually using these platforms said, well, by you blocking these sites, my freedom to receive information has also been blocked. So we have this wonderful academics, human rights lawyers, who are actually bringing these cases. So this is a part of legal mobilization into the Constitutional Court. But these are very, very long journeys. So you have to be very patient. You have to have a huge amount of legal advice. You have to have good lawyers. And if you lose at the Constitutional Court, then your next step is that you may be able to go to the European Court of Human Rights. But if you add, 2 years, maybe 3 years to the Turkish Constitutional Court, another 5 years to the European Court of Human Rights, for one single case, you're actually looking at a very long legal process of getting your site to be freed. Yeah.
Before the session, you've told me that there's basically an incredible amount of cases that the Turkish Constitutional Court is, has the duty to work its way through. Maybe you can just give us that number, but then let us just briefly come back to where's the Wikipedia case at right now, just so...
Oh yeah, the Wikipedia case.
Yeah, but just briefly, I mean, we've heard that a quarter of the Turkish judiciary had been purged by now, a quarter. Is that right?
Well, this obviously links up to the state of emergency that has been declared after the coup, where the government has been sort of purging or looking into a very wide range of individuals, where it's been claimed that they're related in some way or another with this coup attempt. So the judiciary has been heavily hit by this purge. The statistics sort of change, but some say 1 in 5 of the judiciary has been hit in some way or another by these practices. Now, since the coup, which was also raised, obviously there are lots of individuals who are seeking to claim their rights under the Constitution. So the recent statistics are talking about over 100,000 cases that are pending before the Constitutional Court. These are not only internet cases, these are cases relating to the Constitution and the Constitutional Court's remit. So the amount of time it will take the Constitutional Court to deal with 100,000 cases, I mean, I don't know, you can imagine, this is going to be an exceptional amount of time. Some of these cases will be in relation to internet closures, but this will be only a small part of these cases. Coming back to Wikipedia, so this it follows this trend of having an interim order. That's 4 hours. Within 4 hours, this Wikipedia is blocked. Then within 24 hours, judge number 1 has to make a decision. So that decision is made. There has been 2 appeals. One is user-generated activism. Users have launched an appeal. And of course, Wikipedia, through their lawyers, are perfectly entitled to do that. So we have 2 types of legal challenges, both by users and by Wikipedia. So the one group have already been rejected by the judge, this judge number 1 and 2. So what will happen is the next stage is they're going to add on to those 100,000 cases pending before the Constitutional Court, and they will wait their turn for that to be decided.
Okay, thank you. Efe Kerem, internet control is not only about censoring, obviously. Control is also about let's say, their own online presence. For instance, pro-government forces apparently have their own online forces. The Washington Post has reported that in 2013, the AKP formed a social media team of 6,000 volunteers. What do you know about this?
It was right after the Gezi protests, and perhaps how we will remember within network studies that how the Gezi protest was organized. So it's fair to say that it was organized over social media, much more on Twitter actually. So it was instant, and it was going viral. It was reaching everywhere. And well, perhaps more prominent users of Twitter, or the group that is using more, was on Gezi protests also. So they were using it. So this was forming these volunteer, AKP youth, basically Erdogan's youth, who are part of the party, perhaps supporting him. Sitting down all together and giving a reply, like promoting AKP in a sense that AKP is also good on these senses. So perhaps it's kind of fair that they will also have a reply, right? They will also put an online presence.
Yeah, where's the difference to a healthy democratic discourse?
Yeah, but the difference is what they try to do then. I mean, only promoting AKP on social media is fair game. But when you are also attacking the opponents of AKP, then it becomes dubious. It started with journalists, actually. One particular journalist received hundreds of attacks after he wrote something critical about AKP, about Erdogan's policy, basically. Especially when his security policy is criticized, especially internal security. With the Kurdish matter, his foreign policy in Syria is debated, criticized, also visible in the Wikipedia case. The reaction gets very high. So these volunteer members who sound like peaceful at the beginning turned very abusive, very they really targeted online harassment attacks, especially to female journalists. IPI has a research on that. All the
IPI stands for?
IPI is the International Press Institute, and they just concluded a research about this. Especially female journalists in Turkey, they received hundreds of rape threats. And in a country that is also the police force, the security force, and without impartiality of the judges, these threats. If these threats cannot be, stopped by the police force, then you lose all your chances. Then the threat becomes much more serious, much more risky for you. So they turned abusive, and they started their attacks also physically. They got organized. In one case last year, they organized and got together, and they kind of pelted stones at one of the mainstream newspapers in Turkey because of their reports.
So we have this the story about these people being volunteers on the one hand. On the other hand, you were saying that the leak, you were talking about the leak in 2013 of governmental communication in the Erdogan family, and that there's a connection there. What is this about?
It then moved on. I mean, the corruption doesn't stay on the higher level, right? I mean, if a government is corrupt, then you also see it on the branches too. So most of these people were also employed in municipalities, in local municipalities, so that the system can recover itself. So it will be going on and on. So these people have their financial sources as well, employed by the municipality, making the propaganda of the government, and the government also then sends more money to the same municipality so that these people can be. So this is kind of how this is done. And in right now we have all these people, going all over internet, snitching basically. They are reporting. Like normal people saying like critical stuff about government when people can tweet stuff, right? They are critical. They can be critical about the government, but right now it has consequences because we are under state of emergency, and there are huge blacklists of people being purged from their works, from their jobs, from their employment positions. So this is how this tool of young people sitting down and monitoring internet can be used for abusive reasons under a repressive regime. This is what we are experiencing with Turkey.
Okay. We've prepared a small presentation just so that this will be more intelligible for all of you. In 2016, in December, just 6 months ago, another story made the news, and that is that Tor, I hope that most of you know Tor just by the name at least, that Tor and the top 10 VPN services were banned in Turkey. And Melih, maybe what can you tell us about the role of Tor and the role that it plays for circumvention of censorship in Turkey? I will turn on the first slide.
Well, more than 100,000 domains are blocked in Turkey, and that is since years, and people have developed skills to use some circumvention methods. One of them is the simplest, maybe, to use the Google public DNS. Efe Kerem has mentioned briefly, but that was also blocked after Gezi. Another way is to use the VPNs, virtual private networks, but they may not be very secure. The most sophisticated method is to use Tor. Tor is a volunteer-produced system. Maybe some of you or all of you use it. What it does is that it allows you to access the web with two things. One is that it hides your identity. The second is that it encrypts your communication. So that's an ideal tool for accessing the internet in an environment where there is censorship or danger.
I will turn to the next.
Sorry?
I will use next.
We know that the government has issued, or the BTK, that is the body that has been used for censorship and surveillance after TIB was demolished, shut down after the coup. BTK is now responsible for surveillance and censorship. It used to be the parent organization of the TIB, and BTK issued an order to the ISPs to use the censorship mechanism for the Tor and the VPNs, as Efe Kerem said. That's end of the year. And the problem is that the BTK, those devices are expensive devices, and 5651 says that those devices must be paid and purchased by the ISPs. So
Melih, let me just to make sure that we are at the right spot. First, we see the increases of Tor usage in the past, and you are referring now to December last year, right? When the ISPs were mandated to install that, just to make sure that this becomes clear. There was a change in the end of last year.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, let's take from the beginning.
No.
Sorry. That is the Tor usage. So you see a Skype during the Gezi from almost 0 to 80,000. And then we have almost a straight line going with ups and downs. In 2017, we have bomb attacks at Istanbul football stadium. So we have a spike here too. And then in 2017, we have some gradual decrease. That explains the results of that degree of the BTK. So some ISPs are now using the blocking mechanisms. But the problem, as I've said, is that those devices are not cheap, and the ISPs must pay for them. So apparently, some ISPs can do that, but some cannot, and we should have another one. And as a result, we have such a figure. This is the directly connecting Tor users from Turkey. So up until the last year, we have almost a straight line. And then we have some spike for some events, and we have gradual down. Tor, this is the default usage of Tor. But Tor also provides some more sophisticated access to internet through the bridges. There are several bridges, like MEEC or BFS4, whatever.
You need to tell, I'm not sure if everybody knows what bridges are. What are bridges? And I'm turning to the next slide, because bridge traffic goes up. That is the important thing.
Bridges are the servers that are not listed on the web. So if your normal access to Tor is blocked, you can use bridges. So that is an alternative, a more sophisticated way of using the bridges. So those devices that have been bought can possibly block the Tor to some extent. They may have some questionable effectiveness, but bridges seem to be a bit more difficult to block.
Okay.
So,
okay. We are running a little bit out of time, and I'm trying to make sure that we get to all the topics. Just a note to you, before I ask Melih the last question, make sure to think of some questions yourself. Our panelists will be happy to answer them in just 5 minutes. I think the microphones will find you. Up to this point, we've talked about control, we've talked about how the open web has been restricted, and we've talked little about strategies of resistance. And now, as you have lost your job due to a signatory that you made under a call to resolve peacefully the situation in eastern Turkey, and have been very active online in other ways, what are the ways that people in Turkey do resist? We've looked at Tor. What are other ways?
Well, there is a strong and vivid resistance in Turkey, and part of that resistance is on the web. Erdogan said that the coup attempt was a gift from God, so that he could neutralize the power of the Gülenists. But he used that gift also for neutralizing many people who have nothing to do with the coup attempt, unlike the Gülenists. So there are now more than 120,000 employees that have been removed from their jobs. Almost 1/4 of them are in prison now. And the resistance continues. We can divide the resistance into two. One is legal and the other is illegal. For the legal part, we can mention the remaining, still open newspapers, namely Cumhuriyet, Bir Gün, and Evrensel. They are still available, but some members of these journals, newspapers are in prison. And they have strong presence also on the web. The second group of the legal party is the internet news portals such as Sendika.org. Sendika.org is, we should have,
yeah.
Sendika.org is quite active, and it has been closed by the courts or the government until this morning 39 times. So when Sendika 25.org is closed, 26 is available, 26 closed, and so on. So they think that they will go until infinity like that. We have a lot of such portals in Turkey. We also have the citizen journalism sites like 98. As the illegal parts, the most notable example is Red Hack. That is a left-wing group, hacker group. They are available. They are on the active since about 2 decades. And the most important action, the most recent action of them is that they hacked Berat Albayrak's computer. And
who is that?
Sorry?
Who is that?
Berat Albayrak is the son-in-law of Erdogan, and he is the energy minister currently. They have put his emails to the net, and it's available. All the emails are available on the net, on the WikiLeaks site now as searchable documents. One thing important from Germany's point of view is that Deniz Yücel's imprisonment may be related with that, because he mentioned that in a report in his newspaper, Die Welt. And what's more important is that in that report, the establishment of the troll army, AKP troll army, and Berat Albayrak's involvement in a company named Power Trans, which we know that that company has been involved in oil trade with the so-called Islamic State. That is the important thing, because it has been banned. All sort of trade is banned by the United Nations Security Council.
Thank you. So now I cannot see where the microphones are, but if you have any questions, stand up, make yourself seen to somebody with a microphone. If there are any questions, we will take 2 questions at once and then answer them. Please be brief. Actually, pose a question and speak clearly, please. Thank you.
All right. Okay. My name is Dominic. I want to know if you have a proof that Erdogan is behind that Twitter is slow.
Say that again.
Do you have a proof for that? That Twitter is slow. That Erdogan is standing behind that? Because you said you know that Twitter might be slow in Turkey, but who is responsible for that?
Okay. Let's keep this first question. You can answer to that. Is there another question? Directly answer. Okay. Please answer directly.
Okay. Well, of course, there's no button on Erdogan's desk that he presses and then Twitter slows down. But this is kind of a business relationship that is established after years of years. So this leak, the leak of emails from Erdogan's son-in-law, is one of our primary sources that we know how these business relationships are formed, both with the media and with the rest as well. So we know that although Turkey had different prime ministers, after Erdogan was elected as a president, he always had the last say on any matter, including which publicist will have an opinion article on a pro-government newspaper. So that on that detail. So he's very much controlling Turkey. So this is how we know, basically.
Okay, the next question, please.
Over here.
Please introduce yourself shortly as well.
Hello, my name is Paul Hildebrand. I'm from the journalism school here in Berlin. Just wondering, concerning the role of the European Union or our society, for example, 2 questions. First is we're talking about a very long period of slowly putting censorship on the Turkish society. At what point of this time we could have done something, the European Union could have done something? And the second question is, now that we are at that point, that so many websites and possibilities to communication are limited, are controlled, what can we do right now? What chances do we have to help people in Turkey or to change something there?
Yeah, thank you.
Who would like to answer? Maybe first Başak, Efe, if you would like to add something then as well.
I mean, I think on the European Union level, it's the problems with the law have been very clearly outlined, including by judiciaries, the Turkish Constitutional Court and the European Court of Human Rights. So, what everyone in the EU has to do is to stand behind the legal judgments that have been declared, and the problems with the law have already been identified. So, EU has to be a lot more principled and actually push for the legal decisions that even the Turkish legal system itself has managed to come up with in criticizing the law. I think this has to be done on a very consistent basis. But I think I also have a suggestion for outsiders, and I think Efe highlighted this, that some of these organizations like Twitter and other big organizations, they easily sometimes agree with these censorship laws as well. So one of the other things is actually to look at the private providers, and there's a lot of things that people outside of Turkey can do in relation to asking how the private providers are actually dealing with these censorship questions. And I think this is another issue, that freedom of expression is not just there for the states, but also for the corporations to protect. And this is something that we're lacking, a concerted action to also look at the corporate behavior behind censorship, I think.
I think that question is well answered. Would you like to add something?
Yeah, exactly.
We have, I guess, time for one or two more questions, if they are brief.
Are there any more questions? Please raise your hand. No, right now. No.
There are no questions. Well, we will stick around if you have any questions. Also, the report that Efe Kerem has co-authored recently, which I mentioned in the introduction, you can find that, I'm sure, for instance, on the Twitter feed of the Internet Policy Review. As I said, the organizer of the session, I think our colleague will tweet that out. Thank you very much. Thank you so much for all of you being here. It's been a great pleasure and honor for me to have you here. And I guess there's a last question. Maybe if you want to have a last word, what outsiders can do to help. I'm sure many people are interested and also touched by what you said. So what is your specific suggestion?
Well, I am much more naive in this. And even this very session that you are here asking this question, I'm replying, and we are replying about Turkey. Even this is a very good start, actually. Knowing about Turkey, knowing about what's going on. Right now, we are in Germany. You know, we can write these things. We can criticize the government, but people similar age of you, with similar profile, similar education, they should have similar rights, right? But they don't. So knowing that and knowing this contrast, I think is the beginning. So I think this session is what you can do, really.
Okay. Thank you very much. Please give a warm applause to our panelists.